What's up everyone, it's ENDYMION, and it's officially been around a week since the release of Suicide Squad, and I don't really need to tell you that the game hasn't lit the world on fire in terms of sales. Usually by this point, if a game is doing well, the studio and publisher will let people know, but that's not happening here. But now things have gotten even worse, and on the flip side, there's a new king that's dominating the charts for all the right reasons and more, so let's get into it. Firstly, what's very interesting is that Suicide Squad's Metacritic score has finally been solidified by all the major news outlets. And the reason why it took so long is because Rocksteady and WB decided to not send review codes ahead of launch, which usually means your game is likely very bad. Anyway, now the official score is done and Suicide Squad is sitting at 59 on Metacritic. I mean, I know our expectations were low for this game, but Jesus dude, they've achieved Metacritic levels of mediocrity in record time here. And its user score is one of the worst I've ever seen on the site, sitting at 3.8, which is horrible. Especially for a game that took this long to make. But then again, I guess not everyone can have glowing review scores like Corey in the house on Nintendo DS. I mean, just look at that score. Hell yeah, brother. But what's hilarious to me is that the nuclear reception to Squad has actually resulted in people retroactively going back to experience better games. With Batman Arkham Knight's player count on Steam jumping by over 50% since the launch of Rocksteady's latest. And to put it in comparison so you can see just how bad this is going, Batman Arkham Knight, as of the making of this video, is currently sitting at around 3,500 active players right now, which is great for a game that is 9 years old and is also single player only. Wondering where Squad is sitting at? Well, currently it has 3,800 players. So yeah, that's really bad. The fact a 9-year-old game is only behind your brand spanking new one by 300 users is abysmal. And this means that Squad is absolutely certifiably a flop for Rocksteady and WB in the end. But it gets weirder, since clearly the reviews on Metacritic and the user reviews are very bad. But suspiciously, if you go to Steam's review section for Squad, the game has a rating of mostly positive, which doesn't make much sense. Considering if you go look at the actual reviews right now on the Steam page, it's filled with people saying that the game is terrible. These reviews say stuff like, reject Suicide Squad, embrace Batman Arkham, or wait for a discount. People are gonna love this game when it's $30. It's fun, just not $70 fun. They are still deleting negative reviews to cover up this game, it's really not that good. Jaded fans and others have accused Rocksteady and WB of artificially manipulating the image surrounding their game. And the reception is so bad that in order to attract new players, they're effectively running deep levels of damage control to maintain their public image. But the bad news doesn't stop there, of course, as now mainstream websites are reporting an audio and information leak surrounding Rocksteady's Sweet Baby disaster, claiming that data mined files are being unearthed confirming that characters like Flash and Green Lantern might not actually be dead. And apparently, there's an Easter egg in Squad involving Calendar Man, where if you take the calendar spread across Metropolis and dissect what each calendar says, it spells out the phrase, "He will return." With players deducing this either means Batman will return or maybe it's just Calendar Man coming to wreak havoc somehow, although these leaks are suspiciously timed if you ask me. Because if this game was doing very well, these leaks would not be needed to drum up interest surrounding Squad's player engagement. But it's clear that the branding and messaging as well as the fans' rejection of it has put Rocksteady in a very dubious place to say the least. Of course, this is just me being a conspiracy theorist for a second, but I would guess the reason why these audio leaks and so on are going around is because they're trying to save face. And if each of these Justice League members return somehow in every planned season going forward, which let's be real, it's not much of a season if only 3,000 people are playing on Steam alone, but if that's the case, then it's obvious Rocksteady is likely leaking their own future plans, hoping that by doing this they can spread the word that the Justice League aren't actually dead, and the game will restore all the problematic elements fans have come to expect. This entire thing is obviously a mess, and what we're seeing is a developer that was very confident that they could bank on live service elements as long as they used something that had a pre-established fan base already, like Batman Arkham. But it's clear as day now that fans aren't having it. And even if Rocksteady does end up releasing playable characters like Joker, Mr. Freeze, and apparently Deathstroke as well, by the time all of this content comes out, the game will likely be held up with maintenance by a skeleton crew at best, and the majority of the studio will likely be laid off or closed entirely. Mark my words, within less than a year, Suicide Squad will be on PlayStation Plus and Game Pass. It's not a matter of if, but when at this point, since the exact same thing happened to both Marvel's Avengers and Gotham Knights before it. And it's very bizarre to me anyway how WB thought Suicide Squad could excel when they were given real player feedback, since when Gotham Knights was released to mediocre scores and poor player reception as well. Considering when you look at Knights' reception, I mean, it's better than Suicide Squad, but that's not saying much since it's still pretty bad anyway. I can't believe that a WB Montreal Batman game outperformed a Rocksteady-made Arkham game like this. But maybe the difference here at least was Gotham Knights was marketed as being in its own universe. So it wasn't stepping on the toes of Rocksteady's universe, but clearly it was also a boring by-the-numbers experience. And I attempted to play Gotham Knights and I just couldn't do it, man. It was the epitome of boring and lazy. It just felt like a worse version of Batman Arkham Knight with lamer characters who all felt the same besides their traversal. Not to mention the terrible mobile phone UI and the game having pointless RPG elements, like why add that to games like this in the first place? A random criminal on the street doesn't go down in a few punches because my Red Hood's level is lower. You're telling me a man whose life consists of nothing but working out, eating right, and has access to the latest gadgets with an unlimited budget cannot take out these criminals in a few hits cause his player level is too low? Like, come on. I hate it here, dude. Look, I love RPGs, but not every game needs to be that way, and it honestly ruins immersion for stuff like this. Then, of course, Paul Tassi over at Forbes recently released an article claiming that Suicide Squad has the worst enemy modifiers in the entire genre. And I mean, dude, let me just read a little bit of what he says here. It sounds like a joke, but it's not. Just, he said, and I quote, "The issue here is enemy modifiers, as in tweaks that are added to enemies to increase the challenge of the mission. There are some perfectly fine ones, like how enemies may evolve into tougher versions of themselves unless you stop them, but the others, I don't even know where to start. While not the only way to recover shield in Squad, you are tasked with shield harvesting enemies in the game when they get weak enough, which does big damage and recharges a portion of your shield. However, if you harvest them with enough damage to actually kill the enemy, there's an always-on modifier where enemies instantly explode, not only erasing the shield you just got, but blowing through your entire shield and often leaving you at close to one hit away from death. This also applies to at least King Shark and Harley's ultimates, given that they are about killing enemies with melee slams. But those enemies will then instantly blow you up when you do this. There are mechanics to prevent you from being fully one-shot, but again, this leaves you on the brink of death almost every time it happens. Easily the most irritating modifier is the one that makes every enemy blanket immune to afflictions, the elemental types of damage that are the cornerstone of essentially every high-level build in the game. These enemies remain immune until they are hit with a critical shot, and you have to hit each one in a map full of dozens and dozens of them. And much of the time, these are enemies that come with armor that won't let you shoot them at all, much less crit them, which then has to be shed with either a melee or a grenade, and then you can go about critting them to get rid of the other immunity modifier. It's like two separate steps on each enemy to even start to damage them with the core elements of your build half the time. This creates truly baffling scenarios like an endgame fight with Brainiac, where the main way to damage him is to apply the crazed affliction to enemies through ivy plants. Except they are all immune to afflictions, and you get about 8 seconds to try and break the armor crit about 100 enemies in an arena. Then craze them, and the timing is essentially impossible, and Brainiac will just heal back all the damage." End quote. Jesus Christ, I think that's plenty to let you know that Suicide Squad's endgame currently anyway is absolutely cooked. And it's designed to waste your time in order to drum up playtime to make Rocksteady's analytics look better than they actually are. But if the only way to increase player engagement is to make them shoot enemies with millions of HP that constantly refill and leave you near death, what are we even doing here anymore? What's the point of video games like this? Add in nonsense sweet baby dialogue and all that, and it's just a massive disaster. Thankfully, there are bright spots in gaming these days, and this time it's actually from a Western studio. With the recent release of Helldivers 2, that game is releasing on PS5 and PC day one, and its debut has been nothing short of surprising. To be honest with you, I didn't even think people would care that much about Helldivers 2, but clearly I'm wrong. Since as of the making of this video, it's at number 1 on Steam and PlayStation's paid charts, the game is off to a smashing start. It currently has around 77,000 players playing right now on Steam. These numbers are insanely impressive considering this game is basically what Suicide Squad wanted to be. It's a single player or co-op multiplayer third-person shooter where you clear objectives, level up, and get new gear in order to fight bigger and badder threats. It also helps that Helldivers, like Palworld before it, release at a smaller price point. Helldivers 2, in Canada anyway, retails at release for $50, whereas Suicide Squad in Canada is currently selling for $90. I mean, come on, dude. It also helps that so far anyway, from what I can see, Helldivers 2 is completely devoid of any sweet baby woke nonsense. Instead, it's just a game that delivers on the promise of being fun and ridiculous while not taking itself too seriously. And how many times have I said in the past that ultimately this is what people want these days? They just want fun games that they can play to escape the realities of the world. They don't need current day nonsense thrown in their face constantly, and Helldivers 2 proves this. As always, the market will decide which games rise to the top, and it's clear that when you just make a game that's fun that doesn't talk down to people, people will open their wallets in kind. Of course, Helldivers 2 isn't perfect. It has bugs, both in-game and in terms of technical issues, but the fact it had an all-time peak of over 80,000 players is still insane. And actually, Helldivers 2 is currently the best performing PlayStation game release on Steam. It actually beats Spider-Man and God of War in terms of concurrent players during its first 3 days of release. That's insane, dude. And I wouldn't be surprised if Helldivers Studio ends up getting acquired by PlayStation outright following this release. Call me a fanboy, but at least when it comes to PlayStation, for the most part, their games are high quality. Even though, sure, some of their previous titles do have the mark of sweet baby nonsense like Spider-Man 2. But I think what Helldivers 2 is proving right now is that I guess people are open to live service games with free content updates as long as the game itself is great. And I think comparing Suicide Squad to Helldivers is actually a perfectly reasonable comparison. Both are games that aren't free to play, they're both third-person shooters, have loads of upgrades and gadgets, they both have free content update roadmaps, and a microtransaction store that's full of cosmetics. But the difference here is Suicide Squad went down the woke gutter and shit all over its legacy and treated its IP like complete garbage. And Helldivers, which is very clearly inspired by Starship Troopers, just delivers a fun time, no alcohol required, and that's all people want, really.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I didn't do f***ing shit.
Notice how all the best-selling games of 2024 so far are mostly just fun, no-nonsense games. Stuff like Grand Blue Fantasy or Tekken, they just give players exceptionally fun games with tons of unlocks and great core systems. I honestly think the gaming industry is going to head towards some positive change, but only if they adhere and embrace what makes games like Helldivers 2, Palworld, and Grand Blue so great for so many. Isn't it crazy that all it takes to make a ton of money is to release a fun game that doesn't talk down to people? Wow, what a concept. If only someone with a YouTube channel wouldn't shut up about saying that exact thing over and over constantly. Insane, I know. Then we have this article here, which kinda just solidifies what I've been saying. It comes from thegamer.com and journalist Stacey Henley of all people, who I have disagreed with more than once considering she's kind of a raging feminist. However, in this article titled, "It Doesn't Matter If the Devs Tried," and this entire thing is basically Stacey admitting that players should expect better out of the studios in charge of those making new experiences within legacy IPs. One example she gives is the terrible Gollum game, and that was so bad it got laughed off the internet. And Suicide Squad, well, not as bad as Gollum I guess, it still echoes this similar sentiment. These sorts of games, these tired garbage heaps, are quickly being rejected for the trash that they are. I'm tired of people playing nice when it comes to whether we should factor in if developers worked hard on something, if the experience they made sucks. Then again, I'm the same kind of person that doesn't care how long something takes to make as long as it ends up being great. It's like when I hear a band say, "Oh, this record took us 5 years to make," as if how long it took should factor into my enjoyment or opinion of the final product. If the thing you made took a long time but it still ended up sucking, then I'm not sorry when I say you wasted your time and it sucks. Suicide Squad took 9 years to make, and it clearly is not resonating with players or critics. Nobody cares how long it took Rocksteady to make it if it's still a disaster in the end. Arkham Knight took 4 years to make, and it's better in every conceivable way, even graphically somehow as well. Mass Effect 3 was made in 2 years on a hyper-fast schedule on EA's part, yet I would argue Mass Effect 3 is better than most modern games today in terms of quality, characters, and content. The fact it was made blisteringly fast doesn't change how I feel or don't feel about the final product. The ultimate realization here I think we all need to come to terms with is that the majority of the world, and especially the paying customer, does not need to sympathize or make excuses for bad products that they had no hand in making themselves. You could take a day to make a YouTube video or an entire month. The end result is that nobody is going to care if the end product is bad, and that's the harsh truth. We need to stop babying developers and studios when now more than ever we're getting less for more money in so many games anyway. Suicide Squad may have taken 9 years to make, but it still resulted in a 10-hour campaign with bad mission design and a terrible story. And since the Batman Arkham series was made in about the same amount of time it took to make this one game, it's clear that this venture into live service Metropolis was a massive waste of time for everyone involved. And no amount of deleting Steam reviews, pushing the blame around, or pointing fingers is going to change that. Apparently, Helldivers 2 took around 8 years to make from conception to release, and if that game bombed, nobody would give a shit how long they took making it. Because all that matters is the final product, and if that release isn't resonating and doesn't connect with people, no amount of damage control or course correcting will fix anything. I already know Suicide Squad will not be the last bad dumpster fire of the year. Of course there will be more. But I think developer studios and consulting firms like Sweet Baby need to realize that you can push all of these things that players don't want into your games. That's within your right to do so. But like I always say, it's also within the customer's right to reject it and put their money elsewhere. And when you compare Suicide Squad to Helldivers, two games chasing that same dollar in a similar space, it's clear that one game was made without player concerns in mind, and the other is just accepting that video games are meant to be fun, and that's all that really matters in the end anyway. Just make fun games that don't offend your audience and stop injecting politics into every waking moment of your games. Why is this so hard to understand for the games industry? Anyway, I want to end this video on a nice quote from Christopher Reeves, who you know played Superman back in the day. Recently, Bounding Into Comics had this article titled, "Christopher Reeves committed to leaving politics out of it when playing Superman." Reeves said when it comes to bringing politics into entertainment, and I quote, "The way I deal with that is to dismiss it completely. I refuse to entertain, even for fun, the possibility that Superman has anything to do with the real world. Superman is enjoyable popcorn entertainment, and I cannot grant him any more important status than that. The only way I would want Superman to have an influence is as a gentleman, and I think that's important. The whole heroics, the stopping of bullets and fixing of bridges, it bores the shit out of me, but he's a gentleman. He cares more about people than they will ever know, and if people take inspiration from that, that's fine, but I wince at the idea that he represents anything else." End quote. And this is why people will forever remember Reeves for his portrayal of Superman, and why nobody in due time will fondly look back on Suicide Squad. Just keep the politics out of entertainment, and that is now more important than ever before. Make entertainment great again, and that begins with respecting your customers before your echo chambers. Maybe these morons will learn about it one day, and if they don't, we just teach them the hard way as per usual by voting with our wallets. But as always, thank you for watching, subscribe, like, and share the video if you enjoyed it. Thanks to my patrons, and have a wonderful day, everyone. I'll see you in the next one.